My fiancée vanished without a word 2 weeks before our wedding to party in Europe with her ex. I didn't yell, I didn't chase, I just made a plan. I woke up to silence. Not the comforting kind, but the kind that prickles your skin because something is missing. Someone is missing. I reached across the bed. Cold sheets. No note, no buzz of a phone alarm, just the echo of my own heartbeat. At first, I thought Lena had just gone out early. Maybe a morning jog, maybe coffee with a friend. But her side of the bathroom counter was untouched. Her toothbrush is still dry. Her robe was still on the hook. I texted her, "Where are you?" No response. I called. Straight to voicemail. It didn't take long before panic set in. I called her parents. No, she hadn't been in touch. Her mom sounded worried. Her dad muttered something about her needing space. I called her closest friends. No answers. Some left me on read. That told me everything I needed to know. I spent the entire day pacing, phone in hand. Then, just past 4 a.m., I opened Instagram and there she was, smiling, laughing, a boomerang of champagne glasses clinking. The location tag? Paris. Lena had flown across the world to party with her ex, I'd later learn. No warning, no goodbye, just gone. And in that moment, I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I just made a plan. Before Lena vanished from my life like a ghost, she was my best friend. We met in our sophomore year of college, accidentally paired for a group presentation neither of us wanted to do. She was sarcastic, sharp, and completely uninterested in impressing anyone. I liked that. We spent weeks rehearsing together, and even after the project ended, we kept finding excuses to hang out. At first, it was innocent. Study sessions turned into late-night coffee runs. Late-night coffee runs turned into morning walks. I remember the night I realized I liked her. I mean, really liked her. We were sitting on the floor of her tiny apartment, eating cold pizza and watching reruns of The Office. She turned to me and said, "You're the only person I don't get tired of." It was the way she said it. Simple, honest. We started dating that fall. Our relationship was never flashy. We didn't post a couple of photos every week or throw big declarations of love online, but it was real. When I lost my internship senior year, she picked up extra shifts at the bookstore so we could still pay rent. When her dad was hospitalized the following summer, I spent every night with her in the ICU waiting room. We built a life in the quiet spaces, grocery shopping together on Sunday mornings, making up dumb nicknames for each other, singing badly in the car. It was those little things that made it feel like home. We weren't perfect. We fought like every couple, but we always found our way back. 2 years after graduating, we moved to a small one-bedroom apartment just outside the city. We didn't have much, but we had each other. I remember the day I proposed. It wasn't grand, no fireworks or fancy dinner, just us in our living room, pizza on the table again, and the ring hidden inside the box. She laughed and cried at the same time and said yes before I could even finish asking. The month after the engagement were some of the happiest and most chaotic of our lives. We toured venues, sampled cakes, and made spreadsheets of guest lists and playlists. She wanted a garden wedding in late spring. I wanted something smaller, but I didn't push it. I wanted her to have the wedding of her dreams. She'd always dreamed big, Lena, bigger than I ever allowed myself to. She wanted to travel the world, start her own design studio, and maybe write a book someday. And I wanted to be there for all of it. That was the plan. Or at least I thought it was. Looking back, there were so many signs that we were deeply in sync. She'd always finish my sentences, but not in that annoying way. It felt like she just got me. We used to have this running joke that we were an old married couple already, long before I ever bought the ring. There was this one time when I got the flu so bad I couldn't get out of bed for 3 days. She canceled a weekend trip with her friends and came over with grocery bags full of soup, medicine, and this fuzzy dinosaur blanket she said looked horrific but effective. She sat beside me the whole time, holding my hand while I shivered through fevers. When I finally felt better, she kissed my forehead and said, Next time, you're taking your vitamin. That's the Lena I held on to. That's the woman I proposed to. We talked about everything: kids, where we'd want to live in 10 years, even stupid little things like what kind of dog we'd get once we had a yard. She wanted a golden retriever. I wanted something scruffy and ridiculous. We argued about that for weeks in the way couples do when they already know they're stuck with each other forever. When we told our families about the engagement, her mom cried. And my dad opened a bottle of scotch he'd been saving since I turned 21. Everyone said we were the perfect pair. We believed it too. Or at least I did. Even during the hardest moments, when my job cut my hours during the pandemic, or when she struggled with burnout from work, we were always a team. She'd rub my back when I couldn't sleep. I'd leave sticky notes on her mirror to remind her she was killing it, even on days she felt like she wasn't. I thought we had a foundation that couldn't be shaken. I thought that 6 years of laughter, pain, growing, and staying meant something solid, something lasting. One of my favorite memories is from a random Tuesday night. It was raining hard, and we'd just gotten home from a long day. The power went out. Instead of complaining, Lena lit candles all over the apartment and turned it into a mini campsite. We made sandwiches, played cards by flashlight, and slowly danced in the dark to music from my phone. It was spontaneous, ridiculous, and somehow perfect. That's what being with her felt like. Like the world could collapse around us and we'd still find a way to laugh. Even our arguments were weirdly intimate. We never fought to win, we fought to understand. One night, after a dumb spat about chores, she looked at me and said, "We're going to be annoying old people who argue about dishes and still hold hands in the grocery store." I laughed. I believed her. When things got hard financially, I picked up extra freelance work. Lena offered to sell some of her designer books and rare prints, things she loved collecting. I told her no, we'd figure it out together, and we did. We always did. That's why the betrayal cut so deep later, because we promised to always face things side by side. We'd spent 6 years building a life, a rhythm, a language only we spoke. There were words that meant nothing to others but meant everything to us. Places that felt sacred because of the memories attached. The tiny bookstore on 5th where she first kissed me. The park bench where we carved our initials. The kitchen where we burned our first attempt at Thanksgiving dinner. To lose all that in a matter of days, it felt like losing a limb. I wasn't just preparing to marry Lena. I was preparing to marry my history, my future, my best friend. That's what made her disappearance feel less like an absence and more like a betrayal of everything we'd built. It didn't happen all at once. There wasn't a dramatic turning point or a big blowout fight. It was more like a slow shift in gravity. Subtle, easy to ignore until suddenly everything felt heavier than it used to. The first time I noticed something was off, Lena had just come back from a college reunion weekend. I'd encouraged her to go. "Have fun," I said. "You deserve a break." But when she returned, she was different, distant. Her phone barely left her hand that night, and when I asked how the trip was, she smiled, but gave me half answers. "It was good, just the usual." Then she changed the subject. Over the next few months, I caught glimpses of a different version of her. She became less present, always busy, always distracted. She started working late more often, or so she said. Some nights she'd come home after I was already asleep, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't hers. Still, I didn't want to believe anything was wrong. I chalked it up to stress, wedding planning, long hours, burnout. That's what I told myself. But then there were the texts. One night, I glanced at her phone screen as it lit up beside me. Just a flash of a name I didn't recognize. Jonah. I wasn't trying to snoop, but something in my gut twisted. She turned the phone face down too quickly. My heart sank. "Who's Jonah?" I asked casually. She shrugged. "Just someone from college. He's in our group chat." That explanation could have worked, should have worked, but her tone was too defensive, too rehearsed, and after that night, she put a password on her phone. It was small things after that. She stopped asking about my day. She forgot little traditions we used to love, like Friday night tacos or movie marathons when it rained. When I brought them up, she'd roll her eyes and call me too sentimental. Our fights changed too. They used to be short, intense, and honest. Now they turned passive, circular. Every time I tried to tell her I felt distant, like she was pulling away, she'd deflect. You're imagining things, she said once. Not everything has to be a deep conversation. That hurt more than she knew. I stopped bringing up concerns. I stopped asking where she was when she'd disappear for hours without explanation. I stopped checking her location, though part of me wanted to. I didn't want to become that guy, the one who polices his partner, but I also didn't want to feel like a stranger in my own relationship. I remember one night vividly. We were supposed to meet my coworkers for dinner. She texted me last minute, not feeling it. You go. That wasn't like her. Lena loved being social. I asked if everything was okay. She replied an hour later, yeah, just tired. When I got home, she was out, no note, no text, just gone. She came back after midnight. Her makeup was fresh. Her hair is styled. Um, uh, she didn't say where she'd been. I didn't ask. That's when I knew something had shifted between us. Not just distance, but avoidance. The kind of avoidance that grows roots, that thrives in silence. And I stayed silent because part of me still hoped it was temporary. Another thing that started to bother me was how Lena spoke to me in public versus in private. Around others, she was affectionate, playful even. She'd lean into me at parties, call me babe, or rest her hand on my arm. But the second we were alone, that warmth vanished. Conversations became transactional. Did you pay the caterer? What time is your meeting tomorrow? Gone were the spontaneous hugs, the sleepy I love you whispered in the dark. One evening, we had dinner with some of her old college friends who were in town. I didn't know them well, but I tried to be pleasant. They spent the night swapping inside jokes, laughing about people I'd never met. At one point, they teased Lena about her wild days and how she'd tamed herself down for me. One guy in particular, Matt, I think, raised his glass and said, "Ha, I never thought I'd see the day Lena would settle. You must be some kind of miracle worker." Everyone laughed, even Lena. I laughed too, but it was hollow. That comment stayed with me for days. Was that how she saw our relationship? Is she giving something up? She started talking more often about missing out. At first it was subtle, a casual remark about a friend's vacation photos, a sigh when she saw a concert she couldn't attend because of our wedding budget. But soon it turned into resentment. I just feel like everything's moving so fast, she said one night. I paused. You mean the wedding? She shrugged. Life. I asked if she wanted to postpone. She snapped at me. God, why do you always assume the worst? I'm just saying I don't want to feel trapped. Trapped. That word echoed in my mind long after the argument ended. We were planning our life together, and she felt trapped. She began pulling away from my family, too. She skipped dinner with my parents twice, claiming headaches. My mom asked me if everything was okay. I lied and said we were just tired from wedding prep. I didn't have the energy to explain the truth. I hadn't even fully admitted to myself. The biggest shift came when Lena stopped dreaming with me. Before, we used to talk about the future, our home, kids, trips we'd take, the kind of life we'd build. But as the wedding got closer, those conversations dried up. When I brought them up, she'd change the subject or scroll through her phone. At night, I'd lie beside her, staring at the ceiling, wondering where the girl who used to slow dance with me during blackouts had gone. Maybe she was never really gone. Maybe I just wasn't ready to see that she was already walking away, one step at a time. The day Lena disappeared started like any other. I woke up to the smell of rain and the faint hum of traffic outside our window. Her side of the bed was empty, but that wasn't unusual. Sometimes she'd leave early to grab coffee or run errands. I brushed my teeth, made breakfast, and waited for her to walk in with a croissant and that sarcastic grin she wore when pretending she didn't love mornings. But she didn't come back. By noon, I was calling her phone, straight to voicemail. I texted, "Everything okay?" No reply. Another hour passed. I tried again, then again. Eventually, my messages turned into rapid-fire questions. "Where are you? Are you safe? Lena, please say something." By 5 p.m., I'd called her parents. "No, we haven't heard from her either," her mom said, her voice tight with worry. "She told us she was going shopping today." "She's not answering me," I said. "She's probably fine," her dad added gruffly. "Maybe just needs space." Something inside me clenched. Space? 2 weeks before our wedding? That night, I barely slept. I sat in the living room, phone in hand, refreshing her location until the map loaded blank. It felt like she'd vanished into thin air. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? My fiancé left without a word and now won't answer my texts? They'd tell me to wait. At 4:12 a.m., I opened Instagram. I don't even know why, maybe out of desperation. And there she was, in Paris. A story from one of her friends, champagne, laughter, a rooftop bar, and Lena front and center, dressed in a way she hadn't around me in years, bold red lips, leather jacket, heels. Her head was thrown back in carefree laughter. The tag said reunion weekend. I clicked on the tagged names, scrolled, and that's when I saw him. Jonah. Same Jonah from those late night texts, same Jonah she dismissed as just someone from college. The caption on the photo he posted read, "Just like old times, Paris nights." My heart dropped. No warning, no goodbye, no explanation. I texted her, this time no more concern, just the cold hard truth. "I saw the photos. You need to come home now or this wedding is off." A reply followed up with a wall of messages, rational, emotional, everything I'd wanted to scream. Still nothing. That night, I sat on the floor, surrounded by wedding magazines, guest lists, and floral mock-ups, and watched it all dissolve into noise. I'd never felt so alone. The silence wasn't just hers anymore. It had swallowed me whole. The next evening, she called. "Hey," she said, casually, like she hadn't just disappeared off the face of the earth. I froze, then fury cracked through me. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" She sighed. "You're being dramatic." I almost laughed. "Dramatic?" You left. No text, no call. "You're in Paris, Lena with Jonah?" She hesitated, then said, "It was a last-minute trip. They planned it months ago. I wasn't even going to go, but everything was paid for. I didn't want to waste it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You didn't think to tell me? I knew you'd make a big deal out of it." My voice trembled. "What about our wedding, our life?" "I'll be back in time, just relax." That word relax broke me. "If you're not on a plane tomorrow," I said, "there won't be a wedding to come back to." She was silent. Then, flatly, "I already told you, I'm staying. Deal with it." And then she hung up, just like that. And for the first time in 6 years, I realized she had already left me a long time ago. I just hadn't wanted to see it. After that call, I sat in silence for a long time, not crying, not screaming, just still. I thought about everything we'd done in the last few weeks, picking cake flavors, finalizing the seating chart, arguing about whether to write our own vows or keep it traditional, and now she was drinking champagne on a rooftop halfway across the world, telling me to deal with it. I wanted to believe this was a mistake, that she got swept up in nostalgia, that her friends pressured her, that maybe Jonah was just a coincidence. But the photos said otherwise. The way they stood next to each other, the way he looked at her. Like he wasn't just part of her past, like he was part of something she still wanted. Over the next few days, her silence became a message in itself. She didn't reach out, not once. Her parents called again. They were frantic now. "She won't return our calls either," her mom said. "We don't know what's gotten into her." "I do," I said, my voice flat. I told them everything. About Jonah, about the photos, about the call. Her mom sobbed. Her dad just went quiet. I think part of them always suspected this might happen. Lena had always been unpredictable, but I'd been the anchor, the constant. I guess I thought love was enough to keep her steady. That weekend, I started canceling things. First the florist, then the photographer, then the venue. I didn't tell anyone why, just sent a short message. The wedding has been called off. Thank you for your support. My inbox exploded. Most people were sympathetic. Some wanted answers I wasn't ready to give. A few hinted that maybe I'd overreacted. She didn't cheat, right? One friend texted. She just needed space. That's not the end of the world. But it was. To me, it was. Because disappearing days before your wedding, lying about where you are and who you're with, isn't a cry for space. It's a choice, a loud, cruel choice. I boxed up her things, every drawer, every shelf, every memory. Clothes, books, a bracelet I gave her on our first anniversary, the stupid couple goals mug she insisted we buy last Christmas, into boxes, all of it. I put them in the guest room and shut the door. She texted once, the day after I canceled the venue. I guess I screwed up, she wrote. I stared at the message for a long time. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I finally understood there was nothing left to say. That was the moment I stopped seeing her as my fiancée. It was just a girl in Paris now, not the woman I planned to marry. 3 days later, I saw a story she posted from her private account. It was a short clip, Jonah and Lena riding bikes near the Seine, wind in their hair, laughing like teenagers. No tags, no captions, just joy. I watched it 10 times, not because I missed her, because I needed the anger to override the ache. She wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't ashamed. She looked free, untethered. And for the first time, I realized that maybe she never wanted to be a wife. Maybe the ring had been too heavy from the start. I replayed the proposal in my mind, her tears, her laugh, that trembling yes. I thought it was happiness. Maybe it was panic. I remembered things she'd said in passing over the last year, how she envied her single friends, how she sometimes felt like she hadn't lived yet. I'd brushed it off. Everyone gets cold feet before a wedding, right? But this wasn't cold feet. This was abandonment. And the worst part, she didn't even fight for us. I wasn't angry at Jonah. I didn't even know him. But I was furious that Lena chose him. Chose nostalgia, recklessness, escape over the life we built. Over me. A week after she vanished, I changed the locks. Not out of spite, out of necessity. She left, and I didn't know who she was anymore. What do you do when the person you love most becomes a stranger overnight? To survive, you start over. Even if it means ripping apart the future you spent 6 years dreaming about. Even if it means erasing wedding dates from calendars, fielding calls from confused relatives, and pretending you're fine when every corner of your home smells like her. Because that's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't scream, it whispers. And you don't always hear it until the damage is already done. The days after I canceled the wedding were the quietest of my life. I thought breaking off the engagement would bring some relief, like cutting off a dying limb. Instead, I felt hollow. The apartment echoed in a way it never had before. I could hear every creak in the floor, every tick of the clock, every ghost of laughter we once shared. Friends stopped calling after a while. I didn't blame them. What do you even say to someone who's been left behind like that? My parents tried to reach out, but our conversations were stiff, filtered through layers of disappointment and discomfort. My mom thought I should forgive her. My dad didn't understand why I wouldn't at least hear her out. But I wasn't angry anymore. Not like before. I was numb. There were days I didn't leave the bed. I'd wake up, check my phone out of habit, and then just stare at the ceiling for hours. I'd scroll through social media and catch glimpses of Lena living like nothing had happened. More rooftop bars, more smiling faces, her life still moving forward, mine frozen in place. I started avoiding places we used to go. The coffee shop is around the corner, the bookstore where we first met, the park where I proposed. They all felt haunted. One afternoon, I ran into a mutual friend who hadn't heard the news. She hugged me before I could say anything, excitedly asking, "How's the wedding planning?" I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I didn't have the words to explain how everything had fallen apart so quickly. I told her it was canceled. She blinked. "Why?" I shrugged. She left. There is no elegant way to put it. I tried journaling. I tried watching comedy specials. I tried every listicle cure for heartbreak the internet could offer. Nothing worked. The ache was too loud. The worst part was the doubt. Was I too controlling? Was I boring? Did I ignore red flags? Should I have tried harder to keep her? It didn't matter that I knew her choices were wrong. The heart doesn't care about logic when it's been cracked open. I deleted every photo of us from my phone, or tried to. I'd get halfway through and freeze at a random snapshot, her in a hoodie, holding our cat like a baby. Mid-laugh, I'd break down again. I wasn't just grieving her. I was grieving the version of me who believed we had forever. It wasn't until a week later that the panic attacks started. Random, uncontrollable. I'd be in the middle of doing dishes or brushing my teeth, and suddenly I'd feel like I couldn't breathe. My chest would tighten, my hands would shake. I'd sit on the bathroom floor, clutching a towel, gasping through tears, wondering if this was what starting over looked like. A life empty. I thought about calling her, just once, not to forgive, not to beg. Just to ask why. Why did she choose him? Why didn't I matter enough to say goodbye? But I never did, because some answers hurt more than the silence. The nights were worse. I used to fall asleep to the sound of her breathing beside me, the weight of her leg always creeping over mine by 3 a.m. like clockwork. Now the bed felt too big, too cold. I started sleeping on the couch, telling myself it was temporary, but it became a habit. Some nights, I would wake up thinking I heard her keys in the door. My heart would leap and my feet would hit the floor, only to find darkness and silence. I began to hate the sound of keys, of doors creaking. It made me feel like a fool. The neighbors started noticing. The ones across the hall asked if everything was okay. I mumbled something about postponing the wedding and tried to smile. They nodded with pity. That was somehow worse than their questions. I couldn't concentrate at work. I started showing up late and missing deadlines. My manager pulled me aside one afternoon and gently asked if everything was all right at home. I wanted to scream, "No, she's gone. She left me for someone else. She flew to Paris and never looked back," but instead, I just nodded and said, I was fine. Wasn't fine. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the RSVP list. Dozens of names neatly printed. Friends, family, and people flying in from other states. People who had booked flights and made plans to see us say, "I do." I felt like a liar. She didn't just walk away from me, she walked away from all of it. From the life we promised each other, from the love we'd built piece by piece. The final straw came when I got a text from one of her friends. It said, "You should talk to her. She's sorry, she just panicked." I wanted to throw my phone across the room. Panicked? That's what this was? A 6-year relationship undone by a panic attack? I curled up on the floor of the guest room, her stuff still boxed up, untouched, and cried for the first time in days. Not a single tear, just a storm, sobbing, gasping, shaking so violently I thought I might break open completely. But somewhere in the middle of that collapse, a small part of me still whispered, "This can't be it. You have to get up." And I listened. The next morning, I did something small. I made my bed. It sounds trivial, but it felt like rebellion against the chaos, the sadness, the weight. I opened the windows and let the light in. I forced myself to shower, to eat something other than cereal or takeout. These were not grand victories. They were barely surviving. But it was something. Later that week, I walked into a therapist's office for the first time. I didn't know what to expect. I sat in the waiting room, palms sweaty, rehearsing how I'd say, my fiancée left me for her ex. But when I finally sat down and opened my mouth, what came out instead was, I don't know who I am without her. That was the truth. My identity had been wrapped around our relationship like ivy on a wall. Without it, I felt exposed and fragile. The therapist didn't say much during that first session, just nodded, listened, let me unravel. It was the first time in weeks I didn't feel insane for still missing someone who had broken me. I wasn't okay, but I had taken the first step. And sometimes that's all you can do. Survive the day and then the next one until survival starts to feel like strength. Recovery didn't come in a straight line. It was more like a messy sketch, full of detours, scribbles, and days that felt like erasing everything I'd just redrawn. But over time, the chaos began to clear. The panic attacks didn't vanish overnight, but they lessened. The couch became a place for movies again, not just avoidance. The guest room door stayed closed most days, and eventually I stopped noticing it. Therapy helped. At first, I treated it like a confession, dumping my guilt, my anger, my confusion. But my therapist didn't judge or try to fix me. She asked questions I'd never dared to ask myself. What part of you feels betrayed? All of me, I'd answered once. And then she asked the harder ones. What would you have done if she came back begging? That stopped me cold. The truth was, I didn't know. I'd spent so long preparing for her absence that I never imagined her return. Around the second month, I started setting goals, small ones. Wake up before 9, no more meals on the couch, hit the gym 3 times a week. Not to punish my body, but to reclaim it. I started walking in the mornings and listening to podcasts instead of sad playlists. I avoided the love songs, the ones that used to make me picture our first dance. One day, I passed by a dog shelter and on a whim went in. I didn't adopt, not that day, but I sat in the play area and let a clumsy mutt crawl into my lap, licking my face like I hadn't just been holding back tears 5 minutes earlier. That dog didn't care who I was or who had left me. He just wanted to be there. It was the first moment I felt seen, not as a man left behind, but as a man still standing. I went back the next week and the next. On the third visit, I filled out the paperwork. His name was Murphy. He had one ear that flopped and one that stood straight up. He was chaotic and gentle, and somehow exactly what I needed. Having Murphy around changed things. He forced me to get up, to be consistent, to care. His leash was a lifeline. Our walks became a rhythm, our routines an anchor. When I couldn't find the words for how I felt, he'd just lay his head on my chest, like he understood. I told my therapist about him. She smiled. That's the beginning of choosing yourself again. Choosing myself. It felt strange, foreign, like trying on a new language. But I started doing it. I unfollowed Lena's friends, blocked the ones who sent guilt-laced messages. I stopped explaining myself to people who had never once asked how I was doing. I began saying no to invitations that didn't feel safe and yes to ones that did, even if they scared me. One weekend, a friend invited me to a hiking trip. I almost declined, but I said yes. The trail was steep and muddy in parts. I cursed more than I should have. But when we reached the top, panting and sore, something inside me cracked open. It wasn't joy exactly. It was clarity. I looked out over the view, trees stretching far beyond the eye could see, and thought, I'm still here. I'd been gutted, but I wasn't gone, and that was enough. As the weeks turned into months, I started reclaiming pieces of my identity I hadn't touched in years. I picked up my guitar again, something Lena used to tease me about, saying I always played the same 3 chords. She wasn't wrong. But now I played for me. No pressure to impress, just my fingers finding old rhythms, my voice returning in hesitant hums. Some nights, Murphy would lay at my feet while I strummed quietly in the living room. It didn't feel like a performance, it felt like remembering. I signed up for a cooking class, half on a dare from a coworker and half because I was tired of frozen meals. I didn't tell anyone my real reason. I wanted to stop associating food with heartbreak. Every dish we used to love, her pasta, my pancakes, tasted like memories I couldn't chew through. So I learned new ones, learned how to make Thai curry, baked my first decent loaf of bread, burned a lot of things, laughed at myself, and for the first time in a long time, felt proud. Social media became a battlefield I had to navigate carefully. For a while, I stayed off entirely, but eventually I came back, not to spy or sulk, but to start fresh. I deleted old albums, kept one or two that felt more about who I was than who we were. I started following photographers, hikers, artists, people who inspire curiosity, not comparison. One evening, while scrolling mindlessly, I stumbled across a quote that stopped me cold. It said, "You can't heal in the same place you were hurt." I sat with that for a long time, and that's when I decided to move. It wasn't a dramatic cross-country leap, just a shift, one neighborhood over. But packing my things, choosing what to bring and what to leave, felt like shedding skin. I didn't take the couch we picked out together, didn't bring the mug she loved. I donated half my clothes, bought new curtains, painted one wall a bold blue just because I could. The new apartment was smaller and quieter, but it was mine. Every corner of it told a new story, one I was still writing. I invited people over, not for big parties, but for slow dinners and music nights. I let myself be seen again, let myself laugh without guilt. Flirted with someone at the farmer's market once. It didn't go anywhere, but that wasn't the point. The point was I wasn't hiding anymore. I was building bit by bit, brick by brick. And somewhere in the middle of all that growth, I stopped checking her profile, stopped wondering what city she was in, who she was with, and whether she missed me. I stopped letting her absence define my presence. I was no longer someone recovering from a breakup. I was someone rediscovering himself. And damn, it felt good to meet that version of me. A few months later, I ran into an old friend who hadn't seen me since the fallout. "You look different," she said, "lighter." I didn't know how to respond at first. Then I smiled and said, "I think I am." Because I was. I had stopped bleeding from the wound. It had scabbed, then scarred. Still there, but no longer raw, no longer ruling me. There were still hard days. Triggers I didn't see coming. A familiar song, a scent, the way someone said her name, but they passed more quickly now. I didn't spiral the way I used to. I let them come. I let them go. One morning, while walking Murphy by the lake, I caught my reflection in the water. For the first time in a long while, I liked who I saw. Not just the guy who got left, not just the man who stayed, but someone who chose every day to keep going. That was the turning point. Not loud, not dramatic, just real. And real was enough. I didn't plan revenge. Not in the way movies make it look, with scheming and plotting and dramatic confrontations. I didn't want to hurt her. I wanted something quieter, stronger. I wanted peace. But sometimes peace itself is the most powerful form of retaliation. It started with a wedding invite from a mutual friend, one of those people who tried to stay neutral during the fallout. I wasn't sure I'd go. My name was still linked with hers in some circles, but in the end, I decided I owed it to myself. I didn't go alone. I brought someone. Her name was Tessa. We weren't serious yet, but she was kind, funny, and didn't flinch when I told her the full story of Lena. We met at the cooking class. I hadn't even been trying to date, but she asked about Murphy and we started talking. I didn't expect anything. That's probably why it felt real. When we walked into the wedding, our heads turned. I wasn't showing off. I just looked whole. Not fixed, not perfect, but alive. We laughed, we danced. I didn't think about Lena until I saw her. She was sitting at a table near the back, alone, I recognized the dress. She used to wear it on her anniversaries. For a second, our eyes met. I gave her a polite nod, nothing more. Later that night, while I stood outside getting some air, she came up behind me. "Hey," she said. I turned. "Hi." She looked thinner, tired. Her smile was tight. "You look good." Thanks. You too? A long pause. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said. I shrugged, didn't expect to come. She nodded, then glanced inside. "Your date seems nice." "She is." Another pause. "I miss Murphy," she said quietly. That hit me, not in a painful way, just unexpectedly. "He's doing great," I replied. "Loves peanut butter and hates the vacuum." She smiled faintly. Then, almost too softly, "I'm sorry. I didn't ask what for. She wouldn't have been able to list it all anyway." "I know," I said, and that was it. No explosion, no rehashing the past, just two people standing in the ashes of what could been. She walked away first. I stayed outside, breathing in the night air, thinking about how far I'd come. I wasn't the man begging her to come home. I wasn't the heartbroken shell piecing himself together. I was someone new, someone who had loved deeply, lost completely, and still chose to live. The real payback wasn't in ignoring her. It was no longer needing anything from her. Not closure, not regret, not even forgiveness, just freedom. In the weeks that followed, I didn't replay our conversation. I didn't analyze her tone, her words, her pauses. I didn't wonder if she still loved me or if she regretted it all. That was the power shift. The old me would have clung to scraps of meaning, dissecting every blink and breath, but now I had nothing left to untangle. Her chapter in my story had ended, and I'd stopped rereading the same pages. People talk about revenge like it's a weapon, but the truth is, revenge, real revenge, is healing so thoroughly that you become untouchable. I didn't post photos to make her jealous, but I shared moments that made me proud. Murphy curled up on my lap, my first solo hike, a dinner I cooked without burning it, friends messaged support, even distant cousins I hadn't heard from in years dropped in to say I looked happy, and I was genuinely, not every moment, not every day, but consistently enough to recognize it as truth. The company I worked for offered me a position in their creative department. It was a leap, something I'd never have considered a year ago. I took it. New role, new people, new challenges. I started dressing differently and speaking with more confidence. Not because I was pretending, but because I had grown into someone I respected. Sometimes I'd see old friends of Lena's around town. They were polite, curious. One of them once said, "You really bounced back, huh?" I smiled. "No," I replied. "I rebuilt." Tessa and I never talked much about Lena. She knew enough. But once, when we had passed a wine bar Lena and I used to frequent, she asked, "Do you ever miss her?" I paused, then told her the truth. "I miss who I thought she was." Tessa nodded. "That makes sense." It. One night, months after the wedding that never happened, I received a handwritten letter. The envelope was familiar. Her handwriting, I didn't open it right away. It sat on my dresser for 2 days. Then, one morning, after my run, I tore it open. It wasn't an apology. Not really. More like a farewell. She wrote about Paris, about how she'd stayed longer than planned, how she and Jonah hadn't worked out. She didn't go into details, just said she needed to find herself, and that she knew she'd hurt me deeply in the process. She said I didn't owe her anything, not even a reply, but she hoped I was okay. I folded the letter and tucked it into a drawer, not as a keepsake, but as a reminder of what I'd survived, of who I'd become. Not bitter, not broken, just better. A few weeks later, I got a message from one of our old mutual friends. He was throwing a housewarming party and wanted to invite me. Don't worry, he added, Lena won't be there. I hesitated, not because I feared running into her, but because I wasn't sure I wanted to revisit that world. The shared circles, the half glances, the whispered updates. But I said yes. That night I walked in alone, and it felt good. I wasn't looking for validation, but I found it anyway. In the surprised faces, the compliments about my energy, the unspoken acknowledgments that I wasn't the same man who'd crumbled months ago. At one point during the evening, someone pulled me aside. You know, she said, after everything, I really thought you'd disappear. I chuckled. Yeah, so did I. But I didn't. I had shown up. For myself. Again and again. Through the worst of it. There was a moment during the party when a familiar song played, one Lena and I used to dance to in the kitchen while cooking. I braced for the ache, but it didn't come. Instead, I found myself tapping my foot, smiling softly. I didn't need to turn the song off. It didn't belong to us anymore. It just belonged to the air. Later that night, as I drove home, I passed by the neighborhood where Lena and I had looked at houses. I remembered us arguing over which ones had the best light, the biggest backyard for our future kids. I didn't flinch. Those dreams had belonged to a different life, as a different man, and he had evolved. I started keeping a journal, not for sadness, but for strength. Every week, I'd write down what I'd done that reminded me of my growth. One week, it was said no to a toxic invite. Another, tried sushi for the first time without thinking of her. These small wins added up. They became my quiet revenge, not against Lena, but against the version of myself that thought I couldn't survive her. Eventually, even the scar didn't feel like a scar, just a line in the story. A proof that I had lived and healed and risen. Fully, finally, without her. It had been almost a year. I was running late for a meeting. The rain had just started, one of those cold April drizzles that made the city smell like concrete and memory. I ducked into a bookstore cafe to grab a quick coffee and waited out. It wasn't planned, nothing about what happened next was. I was scrolling through emails when I heard a laugh, familiar, too familiar. Looked up and there she was, Lena, holding a paper cup, talking to the barista, her umbrella dripping on the floor. For a second, my breath caught in my throat, not from pain, from the sheer shock of it, like seeing a ghost I hadn't mourned in a long time. She hadn't changed much. Maybe her hair was shorter, darker, her coat was soaked at the edges, but the way she tucked her hand under her chin when she listened, exactly the same. She hadn't seen me. I could have left, I should have, maybe, but instead I stood, walked over. Lena, I said. She turned, her eyes widened. Wow, she breathed. Hi. Hi. It was awkward. Of course it was. There was no script for this kind of moment. No playbook for running into the person who'd once promised forever and left you to pick up the pieces alone. She gestured toward a corner table. Do you have time to sit? I didn't, but I did. We sat across from each other like strangers trying to remember a language they once spoke fluently. She asked how I'd been. I told her the truth, briefly. The work was good, Murphy was healthy, life was steady. She smiled. You look stronger. Yeah, I said, I feel it. We talked, not about us, not yet, about mutual friends, family, what she was doing now, marketing for a small firm downtown, how long she'd been back, 7 months. She hadn't told anyone. She looked down at her coffee. I didn't know how. And then, softly, I wasn't sure you'd want to know. I didn't respond. Instead, I asked, why here, this neighborhood? She shrugged. Needed a reset, thought maybe if I came back, I could fix what I broke. You can't unburn a bridge, I said quietly. No, she agreed, but sometimes you can build a new one. There was the moment, the unspoken question hanging between us. Could this be something again? Not a relationship, not right away, but a conversation. a connection, a window cracked open to the past we had buried. But I didn't answer it. I checked my watch. I should go. She nodded, lips pressing into a thin line. Of course. I stood, grabbed my umbrella, and before I turned, I said, "Take care of yourself, Lena." Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. You too. As I stepped out into the rain, I realized something. That wasn't closure. That was a reminder that healing works, that time softens, that some wounds don't need reopening, they just need honoring. And that running into your past doesn't mean you have to invite it back in. Sometimes it's enough to just nod, acknowledge it, and walk on. Dry, safe. A few days later, she messaged me. Just a simple line, "Thanks for saying hi." I stared at it for a while, then replied, "You're welcome." That could have been the end. Maybe it should have been. But something about that encounter stayed with me, not because it stirred old feelings, but because it didn't. There was no urge to fix anything, no itch to go back, just a quiet awareness of how far I'd come. Still, I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about her more after that, not in the way I used to, full of ache and longing, more like a question I'd already answered but still flipped over sometimes to feel the weight of it. One evening, I found myself rereading the letter she sent months ago. This time, I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. I just read it like a chapter in a book I no longer lived inside. She had loved me once, and I had loved her, but love isn't always enough. Sometimes love is impulsive, sometimes it's selfish, sometimes it teaches you who you are only by breaking you in the process. In the weeks that followed, we ran into each other once more at the park. Murphy saw her first and ran toward her. She knelt down and scratched behind his ears like old times. We talked for 10 minutes max, mostly about the dog, nothing deep, nothing dangerous. When we said goodbye, she didn't ask to see me again. And I didn't offer. That's when I knew I was free, not in the triumphant, scream it from a rooftop kind of way, in the quiet, peaceful way. Like an exhale you didn't realize you were holding finally leaves your lungs. That night, I journaled again. I saw her, felt nothing urgent. That's progress. I closed the notebook and made dinner. Murphy snored by the couch. A new playlist filled the room. And for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. One weekend, I went hiking alone, a trail Lena and I once attempted but never finished. She'd twisted her ankle halfway up. It had become a sort of metaphor for us. Strong start, shaky follow through, abrupt end. But this time, I made it to the summit. And when I stood there, wind cutting across my face, lungs burning in that good way, I didn't think about her. I thought about me. How many versions of myself I'd shed in the past year. The grieving man, the angry one, the numb one, the one who needed explanations. That was just me. Oh. After the hike, I stopped at a small diner, ordered pancakes and bacon and a bottomless mug of coffee. An older couple sat in the booth across from me, holding hands across the table. They reminded me of a dream I used to have, but this time I didn't ache. I smiled, wished it for myself, and knew that if it happened, it would be with someone who didn't vanish 2 weeks before a wedding. That evening, Tessa called. We hadn't seen each other in weeks. Work, life, it happens. You up for dinner next weekend? She asked. Absolutely, I said. We didn't talk about anything heavy. We didn't need to. Her presence had become something grounding in my life, not a replacement, not a rebound, just steady. When we said goodnight, she paused. I'm glad you're okay now, she said. Yeah, I replied, me too. That night, before bed, I passed the spare room, the one that used to house Lena's boxes, the past. I opened the door. It was empty now. No ghost. No wait. It's just space. And that space, It didn't scare me anymore. It felt like a possibility, like a new beginning, not with her, not even with anyone else necessarily, but with me, the version of myself that walked through fire and came out softer, not harder, kinder, not colder, the version that didn't need revenge, pity, or closure, just peace, real peace. And I used to think closure came with a grand gesture, final conversation, a heartfelt apology, some kind of cinematic moment where everything made sense. But that moment never came. And I'm glad it didn't, because it forced me to stop waiting. Closure, it turns out, isn't something you're given, it's something you claim. It's waking up one morning and realizing you didn't think about him for a whole day, then two, then a week. It's seeing something that used to make your heart ache and feeling nothing, or maybe even peace. A year after the wedding that never was, I moved. Not because of her, but because of me. New apartment, new zip code, a view that faced the sunrise. I donated the boxes I'd kept hidden for too long, gave away the dishes we'd picked out together, kept only the mug with the tiny chip in the handle, a reminder of how even broken things can still be useful. My parents and I had started speaking again, slowly, with boundaries. I didn't bring up Lena and they didn't ask. It was easier that way. At work, I got promoted, led a project that actually made me proud. My boss asked if I'd consider mentoring newer hires. I said yes. And that's when I realized I wasn't just healing, I was evolving. For the first time, I could look back on everything and not feel like a victim, not feel like a fool, just a man who went through something hard and made it to the other side. Tessa and I didn't work out. It wasn't dramatic, just two people who realized they were better off as friends. We still text sometimes, still grab coffee once in a while. I'm grateful for her, for what she gave me when I needed it. And now I'm dating again. Not with urgency, not with fear, just with curiosity. I'm rediscovering what I want, what I need, what I will and won't compromise on. One evening, I sat on the rooftop of my building watching the sun dip below the skyline. Murphy curled up beside me, snoring softly. And I thought about Lena. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel bitterness. I didn't feel regret. I felt gratitude, not for the pain, but for the lessons, for the strength I didn't know I had, for clarity I never would have found if she hadn't walked away. Sometimes the hardest thing someone can do to you ends up being the best thing that ever happened to you. It doesn't make what they did right, but it does make you stronger. I used to think the worst part of my story was losing her. Now I know the most important part was finding myself, and I like who I found. I started traveling not to escape, but to explore. I booked a solo trip to Portland, then another to Denver. I hiked trails I'd only ever seen in guidebooks, tried food I couldn't pronounce, and met people who didn't know my story and didn't need to. In one small town outside Boulder, I stayed in a quiet lodge run by an older couple named Joe and Nina, and they'd been married for 42 years. Over breakfast, Joe asked what brought me there. I told him honestly, I just needed to see something new. He nodded slowly, then said, "New places help, sure, but don't forget, you bring yourself wherever you go." That stuck with me because for the first time, I liked who I was bringing. I wasn't the same man who got left behind in that apartment, surrounded by silence and unopened RSVP envelopes. I was someone who had learned to sit with discomfort, to trust his own voice, to choose peace over chaos, even when chaos wore the face of someone I used to love. Back home, I started volunteering at a local dog shelter on weekends, nothing major, just walking the rescues and helping with adoption paperwork. But those hours grounded me, gave me purpose outside of work, outside of myself. On Saturday, a young couple came in to adopt a terrier. They asked if I had any advice. I smiled. Be patient. Sometimes trust takes time. But once they love you, it's for life. And I realized I could have been talking about dogs or people. A few weeks later, I got invited to a friend's wedding. At first, I hesitated. The last wedding I was supposed to attend didn't exactly go as planned. But I went, suited up, brought a date, someone kind, who made me laugh, who didn't flinch when I told her I wasn't in a rush for anything serious. At the reception, I stood watching the couple dance their first dance. The lights, the music, the hush of the crowd. And I didn't feel envious. I felt ready. Not for marriage, not for Lena, but for whatever was next. When my date asked if I wanted to dance, I took her hand. And we stepped into the swirl of light and laughter, not because I'd forgotten the past, but because I had finally made peace with it. Weeks passed, then months. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. There were still hard days, quiet evenings where old doubts resurfaced, moments when I'd wonder if I'd missed my shot at something lasting. But then I'd remember nothing good comes from a place of fear. Love built on fear will crumble the moment things get hard. What I want now isn't perfection, it's honesty, consistency. Someone who chooses to stay even when it's not convenient. And I know I'm capable of offering that too. One morning, I woke up before my alarm. The sun was rising, casting a soft orange glow across my bedroom. Murphy was stretched out beside me, snoring lightly. My place was quiet. My mind was calm. I made coffee, sat by the window, watched the city come alive. And I thought not about what I'd lost, but about what I'd learned. About how healing isn't a destination, it's a daily decision. About how strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just quietly says, not today. About how beginnings often wear the mask of endings. And about how the version of myself I'd been chasing all along had been waiting inside me the whole time. There's no dramatic conclusion to this story. No last-minute twist, no rekindled flame, no sweeping declaration. Just a man who got broken, who got back up, who kept walking, and who finally found his way home to himself.